Hello and welcome to the 2.1 cast. I'm your host, Neil Murray, and I'm joined in this week's show by James. James, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Excellent. And Stefan, how's it going?
Yeah, I can't complain at all. Lovely sunny day in Glasgow, which is a rarity, so can't complain.
It's a lovely sunny day. We have a route map out of lockdown, and to top it all off, Steve Clarke's announced his Scotland squad for the upcoming World Cup qualifiers against Austria, Israel, and the Faroe Islands. Obviously, it's quite a big deal given that our next games after these qualifiers are group matches at the Euros, so it's obviously a pretty significant squad. And before we continue, I think I just kind of speak for all of us when I say the novelty is definitely not worn off. We're still in this. I feel it's great to be in this position where we're discussing a Scotland squad and looking at it in terms of what implications it may have for a squad we're picking for a major championships. It's just quite nice to do. And yeah, let's just get straight into it. I think as announcements go, I feel there's quite a lot to discuss. The best place I think to start is maybe our newest striker, Shea Adams. Kind of broke in some of the papers last night that the Southampton striker had pledged his allegiance to our national team. Thank you to the granny rule, which I don't know about you guys, but I feel it really gives us at least a striker that's in some sort of form and possesses some sort of goal threat. Just a kind of quick look at his stats. He's made 28 Premier League appearances this season, but he has scored 7, assisted 4 goals, and that's also including 3 goals in his last 3 games. So I'm sure you guys will get into a wee bit more, but given our lack of options quite famously in that position, and obviously I think Dykes has been good, but he's in a bit of a goal drought himself at QPR. This is a bit of a coup for us, right?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I think, he's obviously a very talented player. He's a Premier League player. He's got 7 goals in the Premier League this season, which, maybe doesn't seem like a lot, but he's playing in a Southampton team that have really been through quite a lot this year. Their form's been kind of up and down. They've basically lost all but 2 of the last 11-10 games, I think, in the Premier League. So they've really gone through quite a lot, and there's kind of spurt of goals recently. The last 3 games have been against kind of tough opponents. Scored against Man City, Brighton, and he looks like an interesting player. He kind of plays as a kind of second striker, as a kind of pressing forward kind of thing. So he is a wee bit different, I think, from your Dykeses or maybe even your McBurnies. He's not really a target man, I'd say. He's probably more of a useful player that can kind of play. I mean, he probably can play as a kind of player who can hold up the ball and stuff. But I think it's probably quite useful to Clarke as a player who can kind of play in a number of positions up front. I think you were kind of saying before we started recording, Neil, that he can play. Sometimes he's kind of played as a wide forward as well for Southampton, and he's just another good player to kind of have on board, because we are kind of struggling a wee bit for strikers up front. Obviously, recently Lyndon Dykes has kind of managed to step into the team and kind of do a really good job for us when we really desperately needed a striker, and he's kind of filled in a lot of the holes there. But aside from that, we've got McBurnie, who hasn't really clicked for Scotland just yet, and then after that you're kind of looking at maybe like Patterson, who kind of looks like a kind of a square peg for a round hole situation whenever we do throw him up front. And then obviously we're just really not quite sure what's going on with Griffiths. I do kind of feel a wee bit like Shea Adams kind of getting called up is kind of overshadowed a bit by the fact that Kevin Nisbet's been called up to the squad, and I think he could actually be a really useful player for Scotland as well. So yeah, I think looking at the squad and what Clarke announced on Tuesday, I think it's actually a really impressive array of kind of forward players for us, and quite quite a varied array of talents and different types of forwards. So there's a lot for Clarke to play with there, which is encouraging.
Obviously, James, the Nisbet thing, I don't know if it was you and Stefan, or was it maybe Stefan and you, and did a podcast on Nisbet and Doidge not that long ago. But I mean, overall, he really has made the jump up this season, Nisbet, from the Championship and the lower leagues to really looking at home in that Hibs team. And I think a lot of people will be pleased to see him get a chance. I don't even think it's just because he is a goal scorer. He's a really good all-round player. I think a lot of people will be pleased to see him called up. Obviously, it means that a few people miss out in Lauren Shankland and Lee Griffiths. But in terms of, I don't know what you think. I think it's November the last time Dyke scored at club level. I still think he is so important for us. I do still think he'll be able to do a job. He's kind of integral to how we play, but I don't know if you think he would still be the number one striker, or if Shea Adams has this kind of goal threat where Clarke would be more likely or tempted to try and start with him.
I mean, I would expect Dykes is still going to be starting at the very sort of tip of the team. I think that his performances, I think he's played 4 or 5 games now for Scotland. I think he's been very good in pretty much all of them. I wouldn't see why you drop him after those games, but I think in terms of the job he has to go and do, he's performed it very well, because let's not forget his job is to hold up the ball, it's to win headers, it's to unsettle the opposition defence, and he does all those things magnificently. I've not seen Shea Adams, so I don't know if he's the kind of player that can do that. I don't know anything about him. I'll hold my hands up. But I think the way I see it, there are only really 2 candidates for that role in the squad, and that's Dykes and McBurney. I think the other strikers that are called up, we've got obviously there's Nisbet. From what you guys are saying, I suspect Adams is probably the same, and that they're that sort of supporting striker role playing off the target man. But then you've also got guys like Ryan Christie and Ryan Fraser that are, if they're going to play, that's most likely where they're going to slot in as well. So it's actually a pretty in-demand position, and when you look at it as well, the support striker positions, we're pretty well stocked there. I mean, I know Christie and Fraser maybe aren't natural forwards, they're more midfielders, but I mean they've shown in the past that they can do it for Scotland. Indeed, it's Christie's goal that got us to the Euros, let's not forget. So yeah, I think actually in terms of the forward areas, I can understand why people might look at it and go oh god, there's a whole bunch of strikers that haven't scored goals, which is a fair criticism, to be fair. I think Nisbet, obviously he's been out of the team ever since that January transfer request, so there's maybe a little bit of mitigation there, but for the most part you look at it and you think those are good players, and I think that the more time they get with Clarke, the more people get to really understand their roles within this team. That's when we can really expect things to properly click into gear.
It's an interesting one, as you say. I think we are well stocked. I think Christie's maybe slightly out of form. I mean, I know that might not mean much come international break or whatever, but I don't think he's been as good as he has been in previous seasons. And I know Ryan Fraser's had a stop-start season as well, so maybe it's just good to have that other option. I guess the other thing is, Stefan, I get that this is maybe a bit of a trial and error for Steve Clarke as well, to see who he should stick with and who can maybe force their way in to the Euros squad. But is Lawrence Shankland slightly unlucky to miss out this time round?
Yeah, I think he probably is, to be honest. He's been in decent form for Dundee United recently. I mean, I thought he had a kind of... Things just didn't click for him in the first half of the season for one reason or another. The kind of... Dundee United's formation just really wasn't very accommodating of him, and he kind of had to take on the role of almost being like a kind of water carrier for that United side. It kind of seems to have kind of clicked into gear, but this just kind of goes to show you the kind of qualities of players that he's up against, because the thing is, yeah, you could argue that Shankland's up against it, but you then have to say, and this kind of goes for other players we'll probably mention later in the podcast, but who do you drop out this team for Lawrence Shankland? Obviously, perhaps the most obvious one is maybe Kevin Nisbet, but then he's up against a younger player who's probably in the running for maybe Young Player of the Year or Player of the Year in the Scottish Premiership this season, up until maybe a few months ago before he maybe had a hiccup with Hibs, but he's, I think he's pretty sure he scored at the weekend. He's kind of back in the team, and I think to be fair to Shankland, I'd maybe say Nisbet maybe has more strings to his bow, to be honest with you, in terms of what he can offer. Yeah, he's got more goals to his game in the last couple of the last year or so than maybe someone like McBurney, but McBurney's not really in his team because of his goals. He's in his team because at least Clarke thinks he can play a particular type of role for the team when called upon. He's probably not going to get in the team ahead of a guy like Shea Adams now, who's obviously putting goals in for Southampton in the Premier League, and Lyndon Dykes, as James kind of pointed out, is basically number one. So I can understand Dundee United fans wondering why Shankland is in the team. I think Shankland's maybe wondering himself perhaps, but unfortunately this is just kind of the standard of the Scotland squad right now, that you have to basically be if you're playing for a team like Dundee United or Hibs, you really have to be knocking on the door for Player of the Year to get Steve Clarke's attention.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's move away from the top end of the pitch for the time being. A kind of another position that I thought was relatively interesting, just because we don't have many options there, and I think it is one of our probably one of our other weaker positions along with striker is right back. So the two players selected, perhaps unsurprisingly, are Stephen O'Donnell and Liam Palmer. Now, I know like there maybe aren't other obvious solutions out there, or maybe others who would start over those two, but I can't help but feel it's maybe a slight missed opportunity to try someone else out. I'm not saying they come in and they're even going to be guaranteed a place in that Euro squad, but even to see how they got on against the likes of the Faroe Islands, I think that Faroes game is a really good time to see how people fare. I also get the counterpoint that is it though, because they are so mince, but I just think even to get them in and around the setup, and the kind of names I'm thinking about, kind of top three for me would be Nathan Patterson, Chris Cadden and maybe Sean Rooney, and I can maybe pass over to you guys and see what you think. I think for me, Nathan Patterson, I completely get the point that it might just be a bit early. He's not played that much this season, and he also has a COVID suspension hanging over him at some point soon. But I also think when he's been called upon, he's been relatively solid. I think he's impressed in the few games that he has. Again, I think Cadden's been excellent at Hibs in that kind of right wing back position, which obviously would work well in Clarke's setup in Scotland. And then Sean Rooney, obviously, I think you've got that added kind of aerial threat, and it's just a completely different type of player as well. James, I don't know what you think. Are any of those three worthy of inclusion? I think that really what I'm saying is I think O'Donnell's been fine. I don't think Palmer's been terrible or anything like that, but this is a Palmer who's playing in a Sheffield Wednesday team who look very likely to be relegated to League One in England. Is it a missed opportunity, or do you think this is just who's probably going to be in the Euro squads? There's not too much of a point in mixing up right now.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, these will be the two wing backs that are going to the Euros. I'd be amazed if anyone manages to force their way into the first team picture now, given that they're not going to have played. You know, it seems a big ass to ask someone to play their debut at Scotland's first European Championships in 23 years. So, yeah, no. So I think it will be O'Donnell and Palmer. O'Donnell, I think, has been largely fine. I think he's been getting better, actually, to be fair, as time's worn on. And right wing back, obviously Clarke knows him well from his time at Killie. Palmer is, as far as I'm concerned, has achieved nothing of note in the Scotland jersey. I think he maybe got an assist for Dykes once, but I think he's been largely forgettable. I would be quite happy to see someone else given a shot. I mean, you know, like you say, out of those three players, personally, I think like you say, for Patterson, I think with the like sort of COVID ban thing hanging over him, maybe that would send out the wrong message with, you know, everything that's going on at the moment, particularly with the relationship between Scottish football and the government so strained again, as always. So I think it's really between Cadden and Rooney in that respect. So I think Cadden has done quite well from what I've seen, like since he's rocked up at Hibs in January. Sean Rooney, I think, is the most. If you're going to pick a player, an informed right back in Scotland, he's it. You know, I know he's had a wee niggle and he's missed a couple of games recently, but certainly his form going into the League Cup final and then in the League Cup final itself was obviously absolutely brilliant for St Johnstone. You think he was man of the match in both of those games. Like you say, he gives you a threat from set pieces, which is really important for Scotland because, you know, that's one of the few ways that we have to score. I mean, we don't really have a set piece taker, but you know, fine. But you certainly having like someone in him and that, you know, if he can nick a goal or something like that, like, he's important. I think in terms of the role, in terms of what he brings, you know, he's got the pace for it, he's got the athleticism for it. I would be a bit concerned that he's not played loads this season because obviously the first half of the campaign, Diane McNamara was playing basically week in, week out at right wing back for St Johnstone, so that's obviously a concern. So but I think if you're, to be honest, if it was picked purely on merit, Sean Rooney would probably be starting there for me. But I just think the fact that O'Donnell's got that relationship with Clarke already, and he's also got the experience of both playing in the Scotland team and understanding the demands of the role under Clarke already, that probably, you know, tips the scales in his favour. Certainly, I think Palmer's lucky to be included. I think, like you say, Cadden or Rooney could have quite easily been included, and I don't think many people would have raised an eyebrow.
Yeah, what do you think, Stefan? I mean, I totally get the point you're saying, James, about Patterson. I think it probably is too early. I do think he's been good, but I think I honestly, really do think that Cadden or Rooney, I just don't really understand why you wouldn't even have them in the squad to try something different. I mean, I also do agree. I think O'Donnell, he has improved in that system and has looked actually pretty decent. But is it a missed opportunity, Stefan? Do you kind of agree with myself and James, or do you think this was always just going to be the case? I mean, again, O'Donnell is Steve Clarke's boy at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of the issue with international football. Like, we were clamouring for a manager who actually put a plan in place and was a little too boring with his selections and would actually pick players to build up a squad and cohesion and chemistry in the team, and then we're still sitting here moaning that he's not picking informed players when we want them in the team. And this is kind of the issue. Like, he doesn't pick Palmer and Stephen O'Donnell because they're the best right backs in the world. He picks them because he trusts them and he knows they've done a job for him in the past. And perhaps particularly O'Donnell, he's shown for Scotland that he can do a job. I think Palmer's actually been okay at moments. I do remember in certain games he did offer something going forward, or maybe it's the opposite way around. I'm trying to remember. I think his crossing was actually particularly terrible in one or two games I've watched. But the issue then comes up with who you kind of replace him with. I understand the calls for Sean Rooney. I did a piece on him, kind of looking at what makes him so good for St Johnstone after the cup final, and James made a good point about what he kind of uniquely offers, but I just kind of think maybe it's a little too much too soon. I mean, if Kerr's not getting his team, I'd be surprised if Sean Rooney is, to be perfectly honest with you, after 3-4 months of good form in Perth. Unfortunately, it's just not really convincing, I guess, for Steve Clarke. Patterson in particular as well. I just feel like this maybe comes too soon for Patterson, to be honest, this and the kind of summer tournament. Maybe he might get into a larger squad for the tournament, you don't know. But my kind of issue with Patterson is that although he has shown what he can do for Rangers in isolated moments, he's also just not getting enough game time. And if you're Steve Clarke and you're kind of thinking, right, well, I basically need to call up a squad right now that not so much who's playing well right now, but who's going to be fit and will be able to slot into my tactics in the summer. If he's looking at someone like Patterson, he's probably thinking, right, well, he's shown himself in 2 good games in the last kind of week or two, but over the course of the season, he's played 3 games for Rangers. And, with all due respect to him, I'd be surprised if he, if that extended anything dramatic between now and the end of the season. It's unlikely that he's going to be playing week in, week out for Rangers between now and the end of the season. So if Patterson, if he was to introduce Patterson now, he's more than likely introducing a player who wouldn't be, well, he'd probably be fit, but he wouldn't be kind of match sharp for the tournament. In terms of that, I mean, the one player that I'm going to continue banging the drum for, and I kind of made an article for it this week, was James Forrest. I think it's probably more than likely that he's going to get a lot of game time for Celtic before now and the end of the season. Hopefully he'll start looking back to his best, and he is a player that kind of can play in that right wing back role. I think, maybe I'm alone in this, but I actually think he's done a really good job playing there for Celtic under Brendan Rodgers in Europe. And I think he's probably could prove to be a really useful player for Clarke. I think probably too soon for this squad because he's only just back from injury and he returned 2 weeks ago against Dundee United, so it makes sense he's not on this team. But I wouldn't be surprised if he was included in a larger squad for the tournament, and he could really offer some competition to those wing back spots. So I'm not particularly crazy about Palmer and O'Donnell, but I can understand why Clarke's picked them.
Yeah, I mean, the Forrest thing, I'm also a big fan of Forrest. I think he definitely is better for Celtic than he is for Scotland, but I think it purely depends on how fit he can get before the end of the season, like you say. But I think if he was fit by then, I would have him in the squad. Whether he'd be first choice, I don't know, but I think he certainly offers a good option. And with that in mind, let's move slightly to the left of the pitch and continue speaking about the defence, because there were some really noticeable inclusions in the centre-back position, which could have kind of consequences further up the pitch. The main two are Jack Hendry and Grant Hanley being included in the squads. Hanley obviously was a regular in previous Scotland squads, but he's, am I right in saying, the captain of Norwich right now, who are kind of doing really well in the Championship down south. Jack Hendry, I'll probably throw to you, Stefan. You did an article on him recently, but he's really kind of revitalised his career in Belgium, and I think a lot of people are quite glad to see him get the opportunity to even be included in the squad. He's kind of pressed the restart button after a bit of a disastrous time at Celtic after signing for Dundee. I guess the main thing, James, is that we've now got two centre-backs that actually use the right foot, and the other thing would this allow Scott McTominay to move into midfield, where he's looked excellent for Man United this season?
I mean, it could well be the case. Yeah, I think that you could certainly see McTominay playing the right centre mid. Then obviously that leaves gaps at the right centre back. So who have you got? So Grant Hanley, who Clarke said was originally meant to be in the last squad, but then had to pull out, I think, due to injury. So Clarke's clearly a fan of the guy, and he likes him. And he's played with him before, I believe, as well. And then the other option there is, of course, like you say, is Jack Hendry, who by all accounts is having a very good season in Belgium. So they're two reasonable options. I'll be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of Grant Hanley, but as you say, he's by all accounts doing very well in an Norwich team that's running away with the championship. So presumably he's doing well. I mean, I don't know what kind of football they play though. Like, which is kind of the deal breaker, isn't it? Because if they play with some, I mean, I assume he's playing deep because he's Grant Hanley, but I don't know. But yeah, certainly I would have liked to see Jason Kerr in there, to be honest. I kind of feel with Hanley that he's had plenty of shots for Scotland, and I think on the face of it all, he's probably not really impressed all that much. I wouldn't mind seeing some new blood in there. I guess you've got that in the form of Jack Hendry, and I guess between him and Kerr, it's maybe a toss up. But certainly, obviously I watched Kerr a hell of a lot more than I watched Jack Hendry, and I just think he ticks so many boxes. Like, obviously he plays at right centre back anyway for Davidson in that sort of back five for them, so he's good at that. I mean, the one thing that really stood out for me when I watched the game against Hibs the other week was the fact that because Michael O'Halloran was playing right wing back, Hibs were just constantly shelling it over O'Halloran and trying to sort of exploit that space. But Kerr was just so good at covering that. And I think that with Scotland, that's something we're likely to see as well, because it's no secret. Other teams will know that Stephen O'Donnell is the weak point in this team. And like, as much as I like Stephen O'Donnell, that is just a fact. Like, he is, like, in terms of like of all the players in that team, like, he's just not as good as the rest of them. People will try and exploit him. That is going to happen. So you want to have someone that's capable of covering that area of the pitch. Should O'Donnell be bypassed, and Kerr is exceptional at that. He's very good at reading the game. He's very good at coming out. He's strong. He's fast. He's strong in the tackle. I personally, and like, obviously he's got a lot of experience playing in a really deep line defence under Tommy Wright. So like, you don't get handed the captaincy like by Tommy Wright unless you know how to do the basics well. So for me, he ticks every box. I'm disappointed not to see him in. You think, he's just captained his club to the League Cup final, became the first guy in the history of the club to win the League Cup and lift the trophy, and yet still not enough. Like, I'm beginning to fear it might be a case where he's going to have to leave St Johnstone until he gets the recognition. And to be honest, if he keeps playing the way he does, I mean, it won't be long before he leaves St Johnstone. Sorry, Saints fans, but it's true. He's very good, as you all know. Just
before I throw over to Stefan, so say you're talking about it probably was a toss up between Hendry and Kerr. Would you probably see them then fitting into that team on the kind of right centre back side rather than in the middle? Just because I know Hendry plays bang in the middle in like a back four or a back five in Belgium, but with Kerr, would you see him as playing on the right side of that defence? Do you think that's what the plan is, to put them on that right side just simply because they're right footed, Hanley and Hendry?
Partly because they're right footed, yeah, but partly just because like the central defence slots are completely sewn up. That's Declan Gallagher and Scott McKenna, because Declan Gallagher can't do it anywhere else. Declan Gallagher's job is heat the ball away, play it to the other centre half, play it back to the goalie occasionally. That's it. That's what you do, and he's very good at that. So that's fine. I think if you ask him to play in one of the sort of lateral defence roles, then you're going to have problems there. And I think the same could be said of Scott McKenna. I mean, we know that he's got a turning circle like an oil tanker. You need him in the middle where he doesn't have to turn around. So again, that's the only place he can play. So if you've already got two guys in there that can exclusively play in the middle, you're unlikely, I think, to see anyone else playing there. So as a result, and obviously Tierney is basically a centre back now. Like, for the purposes of Scotland, he's a centre back, given the fact that you've got Robertson and Greg Taylor in the squad. Considine again is only a left-sided centre half, so again he will be providing cover at that position. So yeah, I think on the whole it'll be Hanley and Hendry competing for a spot at right centre back, but it should have been Kerr as well.
It should have been Kerr. I mean, Stefan, you've covered Jack Hendry in the last couple of weeks. You wrote an article, but I don't want to say it's a like for like replacement. It's obviously not. But one of McTominay's real strengths playing in that position was his distribution, and Hendry maybe compared to like a Gallagher or a McKenna is slightly more of a. I say slightly more. He is a more ball playing centre back and a bit more comfortable with the ball at his feet. Is that maybe something that Clarke's looked at in terms of he wants to get McTominay back in midfield, given his form for Man United, and he's got the options of Hanley, but also someone like Hendry who maybe can replace McTominay in terms of passing out from the back, and I'm guessing like just to add another question, like James was just saying there, is it a case of really it'll be McKenna and Gallagher, McKenna or Gallagher in the middle, and essentially it's going to be Tierney on the left and then a toss up between these two on the right? Is that how you see it?
Yeah, it seems to make the most amount of sense. I kind of completely agree with James about Kerr. I think Kerr probably deserves it more than Hendry, but I think Hendry's probably a very different player to the one who left Celtic last year, and kind of probably the player most of our listeners will know. He went to Australia, didn't really work out, he got injured, and then he ended up moving to Belgium. And from what I was able to kind of peel away from stuff when I was looking at kind of watching a lot of his kind of match footage and stuff, when I was doing the article on him a few weeks ago, and he said this himself actually. Basically he was stuck in Australia because of COVID, so he just basically bulked up. And I think one of the kind of things with Hendry, he's always been a very smart player with the ball at the ground, but despite being this kind of towering player, he was actually quite lanky, he could get pushed off the ball, and then you can maybe make arguments about how he reads the game, but that's something that just kind of comes with experience. But his stats kind of speaks for themselves in Germany. He was fourth in the division for how many aerial duels he won. He was fifth for blocked shots, second in the division for the percentage of defensive duels he was winning or attempting and winning. So, that includes things like interceptions and stuff like that as well. And then when you kind of add that to the kind of impressive passing accuracy that he's always had as a defender, you can kind of see this kind of young player. I mean, he's not really that young anymore, to be honest, but he's also not he also hasn't actually played a huge amount of football. I think he's 24, if I'm not mistaken.
25, I think, actually.
25 is
yeah.
it? Then. So, he is kind of developing into more of an all-rounded defender, I think. And I think if we want to kind of suggest he's maybe the understudy to McTominay in that right centre-back position, I think that's probably the most appropriate thing to refer to it as, to be honest with you. Whether Kerr should have been in there ahead of him, I really don't have any arguments with that, to be honest with you. I totally agree with James. I think I've always been a big fan of Kerr at St Johnstone. I think he's been even better this season. It's perhaps just unfair that, again, he's at St Johnstone and maybe Clarke doesn't watch him as much. Although you think Clarke, out of all the recent Scotland managers we've had recently, would probably have a kind of sympathetic ear to kind of players like that. But yeah, I mean, I really don't have any issue with Hendry in this team. I'm really excited to see if he does get game time, just kind of if he can show what he has done, because I think he has came on leaps and bounds since he left Celtic. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, in this summer he'll be entering the final year of his contract. And I really don't think he'll be sitting around Celtic unless he gets some sort of promise that he'll get game time next summer. So I would be surprised if he obviously does make the move to Belgium permanent, or he moves on to another club, because I think he's kind of that stage of his career where he's really kicking on at levels. So only other really thing I'd maybe add to that is, obviously the discussion about Grant Hanley. I'm kind of the same as what James is saying. I'm not entirely sold on him. However, having said that, I'm far more comfortable with him and what he can do in a back three rather than a back two. I think this is kind of the strength of the back three. We've got guys like Scott McKenna, Grant Hanley, even maybe Jack Hendry to an extent as well. Tierney, if he's kind of slotted in there. These guys, maybe you wouldn't really rely on them in a back two, in a kind of traditional back four, but in a three, they can kind of be more specified. They can kind of be the header of the ball, or the guy who rushes out, or the guy who covers. They can do specific jobs more directly, rather than having to be all-round defenders, which would be more of the case in a back four. So in that sense, I'm kind of okay with Grant Hanley, because I think he maybe slots into it and he can kind of play to his strengths a bit more if Clarke does stick with the back three.
Well, just before we move into talking about some of the midfield omissions, I think we've just confirmed there that the 2.1 is a Jason Kerr Stan account. We're all big fans. Is that what the kids are saying? Stan? Don't even know. Midfield, right. Yeah, I think it's maybe two omissions here that are the maybe one in particular that was maybe the biggest surprise, James. No David Turnbull, given the season he's had at Celtic. He's maybe been one of the few bright sparks in that Celtic team. He's been excellent. I mean, I'm pretty sure we did a full extra podcast on how great he is, but I think he's maybe still viewed by Clarke as one for the future rather than for this squad. I mean, that's obviously not to say he can't force his way into the Euros team, but were you surprised at this, or is it just a case of it's one of those things where all our good players seem to be in the same positions?
Yeah, I think it's a wee bit of that. I mean, I was surprised. I would fully expected Turnbull to be named in the squad, I think, after the season he's had. When you look at it, it's understandable, I suppose, that he's not been. Because, again, you need to look at the players that he's displacing. And to my eye, that would be either John McGinn, which obviously isn't happening, Stuart Armstrong, who, again, genuinely does very well for Scotland, and then the other one would maybe be Kenny Mclean. You could make an argument, but again, like Hanley, he's playing for that Norwich team that's doing really well. He's also one of Clarke's guys. He's been in all squads. He's been about. So yeah, I think Turnbull can obviously feel disappointed, but as Clarke did allude to, he's clearly got a future as a Scotland international. Clearly, I think we all know that. He'll be disappointed to miss out on these games, and you would imagine we might end up missing out on the Euros this summer as well as a result. But it's more down to the quality of options that we have in those areas. Like you say, we're very well stocked. So I think that, yeah, it's disappointing for him, but his time will come. He won't be waiting much longer anyway.
Does the same apply, James, to Ryan Gauld then? Is it a similar situation for him?
See, I do wonder about Gauld, because again, I think we all like Ryan Gauld. I think everyone likes Ryan Gauld, to be honest. I think we've all pretty much everyone's had high hopes for him forever, and everyone likes it when he does well. So yeah, obviously for those that don't know, I mean, in Portugal he's absolutely been brilliant this season. He's playing for a team that I think they're only just promoted, but he's been like one of the most creative players in leagues when you look at things like XG and XA. And he's really been adding goals to his game, and he's like a real leader of that team, and I think he was captain for a while as well. I think he's occasionally captain. So I mean, he's the sort of player, but again, you look at him and it's like, if you're looking at a player of his profile, we've already kind of got Ryan Christie, we've got Ryan Fraser, and I think that as much as I really like Gauld, and I'd love to see him in a Scotland top, as long as those guys are fit, they're probably going to end up getting an odd ahead of him, and that's the sad reality of it. I think that Christie and Fraser have performed for Scotland in the past, and I think that Christie's maybe not had his best form, but again, as I said earlier, he was the guy that got the goal that got us there. Like, it seems pretty harsh to then immediately drop him from the squad after that. So I think guys like Gauld and Turnbull, they're knocking on the door, and obviously they're doing all the right things. They'll be disappointed not to reach out, not to make it into the squad, but it might be the case that they actually have to wait for someone else to drop out until they're given that opportunity, because when you look at the players that we've got in those areas, they're all generally sort of mid-20s, and they're all generally playing at quite big clubs, so it could take quite a lot to displace them, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Stefan, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add to that. The other name that I don't actually think there's been as much of a mention or as much fanfare this time around is Billy Gilmore, due to a variety of reasons, namely down to the fact he's really kind of fallen out of visibility at Chelsea. I think partly down to injury, partly down to Frank Lampard leaving, who was obviously a big advocate and fan of his. I'm guessing, I mean, it just isn't going to be his time, partly because of some of the reasons James has been mentioning, but also he just purely isn't playing enough football, is he?
No, he's not. I've kind of suggested, I kind of was expecting Gilmore to actually move on loan in January, to be perfectly honest with you. He decided to stay at the club, I think. I think he had offers from maybe Southampton and maybe West Brom to go out on loan. Didn't do it. And I'm just not sure about Gilmore at Chelsea, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. I kind of feel long term he's probably going to have to leave the club to get game time. There's a lot of really quality midfielders in that Chelsea team new manager who's kind of just decided to, and Thomas Tuchel, who's kind of decided to go with the more experienced players, and it's working out for him right now. Maybe he might get implemented into the team next season, but he's kind of at that stage now where he has to be playing football every week. I think you can't really get away with kind of jumping in and out from the Chelsea reserves anymore. Especially from a Scotland perspective, I don't really see any concept of him, getting into Scotland team anytime soon, unless he is playing week in, week out. And it seems as though he could quite easily find his way at another Premier League club, so it's not as if he'd really have to drop down a division or two. So hopefully next season, it'd be great to say we have a Scotland player at Chelsea, but if that's not the case, then I'd quite happy to take Billy Gilmore at Southampton or Brighton or something every week if he means he's getting game time. The Turnbull one's an interesting one. I was just thinking there when James was talking that how you said, Neil, at the start of the podcast, that still not over this kind of novelty feeling of going to the Euros. I'm still not over this novelty feeling of having to talk about the Scotland squad and make excuses for why these great players aren't in the squad. It's something that we've just kind of it's just kind of crept into society or Scottish football, that we woke up one day and we suddenly got like two reels of, basically you could put together like 2 or 3 start 11s of Scotland teams who are full of really good players. And every time we do these podcasts about the national team, there are like 4 or 5 outstanding players who just can't get into it. And Turnbull's one of them this time around. You could maybe make the argument that, like for like, he's probably better than Ryan Christie right now in terms of form, but there's no way that Ryan Christie's getting dumped out of the Scotland squad after basically, as James said earlier in the podcast, scoring the winning penalty to get us to the tournament. And if you're kind of looking at maybe other kind of attacking midfielders, it would mean that Clarke would have to drop a Kenny Mclean or Stuart Armstrong. Armstrong, he's getting game time at Southampton this season. He's doing quite well. He's picking up goals and assists where he can. One of the extra podcasts we did early in the season with Sam Tighe, who's an English football journalist, and he was singing songs of praise about Armstrong at Southampton. He's very well regarded down there. Kenny Mclean, much like Grant Hanley, he's playing week in, week out for a very strong Norwich side in the Championship. And I think Kenny McLean's also a player that Clarke just likes quite a lot. In particular, he seems to be his kind of go-to late substitution when we are either chasing a game or you just need someone to kind of run around chasing the ball down. So aside from that, John McGinn, the guy who's one of the most impressive players in the Premier League, Scott McTominay, a Manchester United star. I mean, there's just no space for David Turnbull in the squad at the minute, unfortunately. And I really don't know how that could change between now and the summer. And the kind of same goes for Ryan Gauld as well. I mean, I know he's maybe kind of considered a centre midfielder, but I'm pretty sure from what I've read, and James has wrote good articles on him for the website this year. Byron Hutchison, who kind of covers the Scotland, the website where he cover, he kind of catalogues Scotland players playing abroad. He puts out weekly good content in Gauld. I think he'd happily tell you that he's more of an inside forward these days in Portugal. So we would really have to be dropping a Ryan Fraser, a Ryan Christie, someone like that to get Gauld into this team. And it's just not happening, unfortunately. And it's a shame on these guys, but this is just it's a fantastic situation to be in for Scotland, because I don't like to think of myself as being an old person, but I can certainly remember, I think all three of us can remember growing up in like the noughties when it really was kind of, and even like the late 90s when there wasn't a huge amount of depth in the Scotland squad, so at least there wasn't a huge amount of young players coming through to get excited about. But now it seems we've got barrelfuls who are just knocking on the door and we're trying to figure out ways to get them into the team.
I think that's a nice positive note to finish on. That's one of the most positive notes you've ever had in the hundreds of episodes of this podcast we've ever done, Stefan. Can
I immediately ruin it by saying that even though we've got a good Scotland squad, we should be boycotting the World Cup? So after this tournament, we won't play another one for 6 years, I think.
Yeah, if you want to see that point expanded, there is a piece on the website that Stefan did on why you should boycott, or why we should boycott the 2022 World Cup in Qatar. I do urge you to read it. It's a very, very good read. We will leave it there though. Thanks, James and Stefan.
Can I offer one last point? That's something that's just occurred to me.
Yeah, of course you can.
This is very important. By my count, in this current squad, there are 3 ex-Partick Thistle players. Mary Hill is wonderful. There you go, folks.
Can I add a further point to James's point and say that one of them that he's included is a player who was kicked out of Partick Thistle and deemed not good enough in Kevin Nisbet?
Yeah, but that's incidental, you know.
Is it? Right, so Thistle's still getting credit for
for
it.
anyone that I just realised I didn't actually say. The other ones are Stephen O'Donnell, who is of course part of the championship winning team, and then Jack Hendry, who started at Thistle before moving to Dundee.
Yeah, and without his experience at Thistle, the fire wouldn't have been lit in Kevin Nisbet's belly to be where he is today. It's the way I'm taking
He does say that, you know, moving down the leagues was the boot up the arse that he needed. So, you know, you're welcome, Kevin.
So we're also a Partick Thistle stan account as well. There you go.
We always have been.
We always have, yeah. Actually, we definitely always have been. We'll leave it there. As usual, if you're able to leave us a review on iTunes or recommend the podcast to any of your friends, that'd be great. And we'll be back with an extra podcast on Friday. And as usual, there are plenty of great articles on the 2.1 website, and you can find them all by going over to our Twitter at the 2.1. We'll see you then. Cheers.